I was married to my ex-wife for almost 3 years, but we had to go out separate ways due to her infidelity. My ex-wife and I grew up in the same town, so we weren't complete strangers when we started dating. We even went to the same high school, but I was a couple of classes ahead of her, and we didn't get close to each other until after college. From the beginning, I didn't want to leave our town for greener pastures or anything. I loved it there and always wanted to be close to the people who mattered. The same applied to my ex-wife. She returned to overlook her parents' restaurant after she graduated from college, and that's when our relationship started. We became perfect friends after she returned, and some months after we got to know each other better, we started dating. Since we all lived in a small town, everyone knew we were in a relationship and possibly would end up marrying each other, and that's precisely what happened. After a year and 7 months of being in a relationship, we got married and had a beautiful wedding. I worked as a carpenter and earned a decent amount of money monthly, so I gave my ex-wife the kind of wedding she wanted. It wasn't so big, but it was what she wanted, and everything turned out as planned. After we got married, we went on our honeymoon, but just 2 days after we left, we had to return because her mother passed away in her sleep. It was a very tough season for both of us, and the first year of our marriage was filled with mourning. She was an only child, and I imagined how terrible she must have felt to lose her mother like that. Meanwhile, I supported her in any way I could. I grieved with her, cared for her, and was there for her at all times. It wasn't how I wanted us to start our marital journey, but since death was something no one could predict or stop, I could do nothing. My ex-wife started coming out of her shell in the second year of our marriage. Because of her loss, she had become a shadow of herself and lost interest in many things. When this happened, I was so glad and looked forward to having the kind of marriage I always imagined. The first year had been very tough for me, and I loved her so much and didn't want to break our vows. I expected that our relationship/marriage would be fixed after she got over her mother's death, but that didn't happen. I felt like she was cold to me, and even if we got intimate, I didn't feel the spark we used to have while we were dating. Most times, it felt like I was forcing myself on her, and it kept getting worse that I had to do some research online. With my research, I learned a lot of things and understood why she acted that way. I knew I had to give her time, and it felt like we were drifting apart the more time I gave her. I didn't enjoy the first 2 years of my marriage, but I had to stay because I expected her to snap out of that state and change. One time, I even confronted her about her change in character and how I wasn't enjoying our marriage, but she called me selfish and insensitive. The very annoying part was that if we went out to a wedding, gathering, or whatever event we were attending, she would be very active, laugh at funny and dry jokes, and interact with people like everything was cool with her. But as soon as we got home, she would change. Our marriage was getting very boring, and after constantly nagging about her attitude for weeks, I started to see a few changes. She became more active at home, spent time with me, and we started doing all the fun things we used to do as singles, but never had the opportunity to do in our marriage because of the tragedy that struck. Sincerely, her changes made me feel loved, and throughout that time, our marriage was shaky and she was grieving. I never tried to play smart with or look at any woman in a way I shouldn't have. I'll admit, there were temptations, especially since I wasn't getting what I wanted and our conversations were so boring, but I loved her so much and I knew what a 5-minute mistake could do to our marriage. Our home was filled with happiness and laughter for the following months, and I enjoyed her company so much. The icing on the cake was when we found out she was pregnant, and I was so excited I would become a father. It meant so much to me. Overall, I was glad I was finally having the marriage of my dreams. About 6 months after my ex-wife found out she was pregnant, I decided to make things up to her. I knew the news of her mother's death had ruined our honeymoon, and even though she never mentioned it, I knew she would love to return to the same place. It was expensive, but I started saving for it 2 months after things returned to normal. After all the bookings and preparations were made, I broke the news to her, and we didn't just take it as our honeymoon, but as a romantic getaway. And she really loved it because our wedding anniversary was only a week after we'd returned from the getaway, and we planned on renewing our vows in front of friends and family. The renewal of vows was my idea, and I thought it was necessary because we were only beginning to enjoy our marriage. Eventually, we went on our second honeymoon getaway and had so much fun together. We visited places, took multiple pictures, and most importantly, tried different foods. We were only meant to spend a week there, and on our 6th day there, I made a shocking discovery. I can't really recall what took me to my ex-wife's phone. I think she was gisting me about the news that went viral on Facebook, and since I wasn't on Facebook then, she gave her phone to me so I could read it. Then she went into the bathroom to shower. And because I wasn't very interested in the news, I pressed the return key, and it opened her text messages. I know I shouldn't have read her messages, but I couldn't resist the temptation. It was my first time doing so. There was a name saved as My Happiness in Spanish, and it piqued my curiosity. So I opened the message, and to my greatest surprise, it was our former wedding planner. There were also a lot of pictures shared between them, nudes, pictures of them together in bed, and photos of them kissing each other. Another thing was they had been dating each other for 2 years under my nose, and a month after our wedding anniversary was their second anniversary. At that point, I felt the room spin, and my chest almost exploded from being too tight. I would really love to explain how I felt, but no amount of words can describe it. I'm still somewhat surprised that I was smart enough to forward all their messages to my number in that state of shock and delete all that I sent to my phone so she wouldn't know. Honestly, the rest of our romantic getaway was ruined, and there was a change in my attitude too. I was so worried that the child she was carrying wasn't mine, and for nights I did not sleep well or think straight. I even missed working on most of my clients' projects because I was not in the right mind. Meanwhile, I kept everything in and did not confront her about anything. She was so engrossed with our small renewal of vows party that she thought I was having mood swings again. So, on our anniversary, we did our thing, and I was patient enough for our vows to be renewed. They didn't mean anything to me anymore, and after we were done, I asked that the gifts I got for her be brought in so she could open them in front of everyone. Anyone who saw the size of the gifts could tell they were framed pictures, but maybe she thought they were pictures from our second honeymoon. I asked for the photos to be given to her so she could open it herself, and she did. Immediately she opened it. Everyone gasped, and she froze. I asked her to open the second one, and she reluctantly opened it with tears in her eyes. Then I opened the last one myself. All 3 pictures were of her and our former wedding planner, in bed, naked together, and a picture of them kissing each other. Funnily enough, he was in attendance, and his wife and children were there too, since we were close in some way. I felt so satisfied to expose my ex-wife and embarrass her in front of everyone. Then I told her it was over between us, and I wanted nothing to do with the child she was carrying because it was obviously not mine. She cried, begged me, and even said she didn't know how she entered an affair with him, but she was drawn to him because he comforted her more and didn't fake his grieving like I did. I was shocked to hear her say that because I sacrificed so much in her grief to be with her. It hurt, and it was more reason to get her out of my life. We divorced shortly after, and the whole town carried the news. The wedding planner's wife was so mad, too, that she divorced him, and in addition, he was forced to retire after the word spread like wildfire. I never took responsibility for the pregnancy, and the wedding planner said it wasn't his until DNA proved it was. It still hurts me whenever I remember what I got in return for being patient with my ex-wife and loving her foolishly. I haven't healed yet, and the wound opens each time I see her or bump into her. It's also been 4 years, and I haven't been in another relationship since then. I don't know if I will, but I'm sure I can never love another woman the way I loved my ex-wife. That part of me is gone. OP, many men would not have renewed their vows with their spouses, especially after she did something this terrible to you. Your wife was using fake grieving as her justification to cheat on you. No matter what you did for her, she would never have appreciated it. I'm glad she is out of your life for good. You don't deserve such negativity. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now, let's move on to the second story of the day. My wife and I were what you'll call the perfect couple. We loved each other so much and attended events, gatherings, weddings, church, and other social gatherings. Like I mentioned at the beginning of my story, we attended the same church, and being that she was a very devoted Christian, attended church all the time, and didn't live the kind of lifestyle other women on social media did, I believed she was the one for me. I liked her from the moment I set my eyes on her, and because she was the only woman I was attracted to since I moved into the city, I thought it was wise to talk to a couple of people before we became a thing, and they all guaranteed me she was a great girl. Indeed, she was a great girl. She was well-mannered, polite, pretty, and kind to other people, including strangers. She was a college graduate and worked as a vet assistant in one of the biggest vet shops in town. On my end, I worked with a marketing firm, and I built websites as a side job. Eventually, I got closer to her after observing her for a while, and we ended up dating. We dated for only a year, and we got married. Initially, I thought I was making one of the best decisions of my life, but after things turned out the way they did, I realized I made a terrible mistake. After my wife and I got married, we had a son after a year, and our life seemed perfect. We were one big happy family, and I did my best to look after our son. Despite how much I tried to keep my family together and give them a good life, something always had to go wrong. The first thing that happened was that our 6-month-old son broke his left arm while my wife cared for him one weekend. That Saturday, I went to hang out with a couple of friends and then stopped to get groceries on my way back. When I got home, the first thing I heard was the loud cry of our son, and when I rushed to check what was going on, I met my wife, trying to stop him from crying. According to her, she wanted to grab something from a neighbor's house, so she asked my 7-year-old nephew, who came over to stay with us that weekend, to look after the baby, and in the process of playing with our son while she was away, he broke his arm. I don't really get how. Maybe my nephew must have pulled his arm too hard, or tried to throw him and grab him like we did in his presence. Funnily enough, when I returned home, my wife was all dressed, and it was odd for her to visit a neighbor looking all dressed. I suspected something was off, but at that time, what was most important was getting our son back to good health, and achieving that took a while. By the time our son had recovered fully, the matter had died, and I could not bring it up again. Although I tried to question my nephew, he was slightly shaken by what had happened, and his side of the story was not coordinating with my wife's. About a year after that, I noticed that my wife and I grew distant. We were both working hard to make ends meet, but it wasn't like our jobs changed. We still did the same job, worked the same hours, and split chores at home, and even though I was a bit difficult at times, I still loved her and treated her well. The reason we had issues was because she was just too careless and dirty. It was crazy for me to come home and see our son's removed diaper on a dirty plate in the sink, and the whole kitchen smelled terrible. There are also some things I cannot say here because of how embarrassing it was. Aside from her carelessness and not being as tidy as I wanted, we had no other issues. I also tried to make up to her whenever I started our fights and arguments, so she wouldn't think I was maltreating or nagging her because of our age difference. All this while, I never thought my wife would cheat on me until I saw things with my own eyes. It was devastating because I loved her more than I loved myself, and I sacrificed a lot to make her happy. That day, I came home from work about an hour earlier because I wasn't feeling well. When I got home, I noticed that our repairman's company truck was parked in my driveway, which was odd. And because his vehicle was in the driveway, I was forced to park behind him. When getting to my porch, I heard very loud moaning from my living room, and I immediately knew what was happening. To be sure of what I heard, I pushed the door open with force, and my eyes saw something I couldn't get out of my head to date. My wife and the repairman were doing it on our couch, and our son was in the living room watching them. I was so mad that I grabbed our son first before I kicked the repairman out of our house, and I yelled at my wife to join him, but she refused. She begged me, knelt down, and cried like she was innocent. She held my legs and even rolled on the floor if that wasn't enough. She told me she was sorry and didn't know what made her do it. She even tried to lie about it being their first time, but I was sure it wasn't. Without me saying it, she knew our next step would be a divorce, and before I even voiced it, she started begging me not to divorce her. She knew she had a reputation to keep, and that's why she begged me not to divorce her. I also knew she wanted our marriage, so I played a smart one on her. I told her I wouldn't divorce her if she told her friends, family, and the church the absolute truth about her affair with the repairman, and she agreed. I kicked her out of the house and took our son from her to avoid making her feel comfortable with the crime she had committed. Meanwhile, while the repairman was around, I threatened to report him to the organization he worked for, and I did. I had heard stories of repairmen and pizza delivery boys having affairs with married women, but I thought it was made up until it happened to me. Long story short, she exposed herself, and it turned out she was having an affair with him since the time our baby broke his arm. She lied and said she had gone out to get something from a neighbor, but in reality, she went out with him, leaving our son behind with a 7-year-old. When everyone heard this, they were so disappointed, and I still filed for a divorce and used her evidence against her in court. I also mentioned the part where she had our son in the living room while she was doing it with the repair guy. And I mentioned how careless she was to leave our baby with another child, which resulted in a broken arm. With all that presented, I won custody of our son. Meanwhile, her parents were so disappointed that they disowned her and wanted nothing to do with her anymore. Since then, she has been living with their rejection, and as for the repairman, his company fired him, but I don't know if they carried on with their affair. The church had to suspend her for a while, but I left the church and moved to a different house. This happened 2 years ago, and right now, I have met someone who also has a daughter around my son's age, and we are taking care of the kids together. P, I'm sorry you had to go through this. The truth is, most times, marrying a woman or devoted Christian from the church does not guarantee she will be faithful to you. Meeting a loyal partner has nothing to do with the church. It has more to do with the person's personality. Know that you just dodged a bullet. If she said she didn't know why she did it, then she could get confused again in the future. For now, focus on your new significant other and how to take care of the kids together, and make sure you heal properly so you don't think every woman you meet will be the same. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone